Toward Solstice Station by Stephen Withrow and Frank Coffman. 1. 1898. Edith sat up straight and primly on the padded train compartment bench. Beyond the window, shapes moved dimly as evening rain began to drench darkened plains and rural valleys. In towns, the lamplit lanes and alleys that lay beside the railroad track, like children resting back to back. She thought of speaking out to mention a blob that might have been a cow, but mother and father would not now give foolish Edith their attention. How she could raise such a fuss when they had matters to discuss. "Oh, Lizzie, you're exasperating. Even the child knows war with Spain is braver than negotiating a coward's peace. McKinley's reign will end, with Cubans left still fighting undefended," father, lighting his pipe and puffing smoke, remarked. But mother, smoothing her dress, was sparked and almost flamed with indignation. It took what strength she had to hold within her fierce riposte. A cold, unblinking glare was her oration. When father looked away, chagrined, she crossed herself as though she'd sinned. Father stood and fled the carriage, leaving mother looking lost and small. All Edith knew of marriage told her it wasn't worth the cost. There had to be another option. Wanting babies? Try adoption. Mother reached down for her purse with the firm hands of a former nurse and took upon her lap her knitting. She started on her pillow sham and whispered, "Damn, damn, damn." With guilt she glanced at Edith, sitting doll-like with her travel dress and ringlet curls, said, "What a mess." Parents in Edith's dreams can't quarrel. In sleep she felt her Cleveland house to be a pleasant home. Immoral thoughts and acts were, like a mouse, not let inside. They were adoring, Mum and Dad, less crass and boring than they were when she woke. Trips west would find them fancifully dressed as pilgrims or explorers. An only child had sisters there, and friends for parlor games and let's pretends. There was no reason to be lonely. Afternoons through silent meals. The train steamed forth on iron wheels. Later, when father entered huffing about the chilly air tonight, mother stiffened, quickly stuffing sham and needles out of sight. "Please, Arthur, sit," she said, enticing. He said, "The land around is icing and freezing rain. It's Illinois out there. I asked a porter's boy how long until we see the city. He thinks we'll reach Chicago by the time the dawn sun's in the sky. Well, that's just how he said it. Pretty like that." He coughed, then stamped his feet, and removing his hat, resumed his seat. There was no sleeping car or trundle, so Edith lay, her body slumped against the window on a bundle. Her parents talked, but she was stumped to give some terms specific meaning. Although she listened close, head leaning toward the western states. "A war will spread, and earth will flood with gore," mother murmured. Father answered, "War's a human need. Life takes from life." Mother gasped. "That makes us monstrous, then. A race of cancered, soulless, hateful husks," she said. And Edith slept, their words gone dead.
1917. The train pulled into Union Station, and Edith awakened with a start. Chicago, hub city of the nation, squealing wheel and creaking part. A brief cloud of steam, and then a vision of bustling folk avoiding collision. Noises, voices, conductor's call. It took her a moment to sort it all. She felt the train car rock and slowing, broad, busy platforms far and near. Only the first leg ended here. This city was not where they were going. The Chicago special whizzed to a halt. "It's those damned Huns who are at fault. We should be in this war already. Lusitania was 2 years ago." Her dad's rehearsed speech always steady. "It doesn't take a genius to know." Young Edith was growing very weary of this war talk, scary, dreary. He had the man adjacent's ear, who seemed to share her mother's fear. "But, sir, it's surely Europe's fracas. It's not our business. Why shouldn't we stay this side of a sheltering sea? I can't imagine what would make us join this affair, take either side, protected by an ocean wide." "Well, there you echo my wife Lizzie, who claims we're safe. Why should we send our boys abroad to meet their end? You pacifists, all in a tizzy, to shirk the horrors of this war. History's taught us well before that sooner's better than too late. I tell you, sir, we should not wait." At this she noticed her mother's turning away from the men and their debate. Her mother had not smiled of late. Embarrassed to be mentioned, yearning to join the talk, but she knew her place and hid the flush upon her face. "Well, then, we differ in opinion, and there is no solving this today. Although we've neither right nor dominion, it's likely that you'll have your way. It certainly seems that we are headed down the path your wife and I have dreaded." So saying, the man looked at his watch. "I say I have a train to catch. I pray you're wrong, sir," and extended a hand her father was slow to take, but with a nod gave it a shake. And with that their conversation ended. After the man had taken leave, mother tugged on father's sleeve. "I wish you wouldn't always bluster," she whispered. Edith just looked away. "I swear it takes all the will I can muster not to chime in and say my own say. And when you give my name a mention, to think I pay you no attention, it irks me so. And our daughter's here, doesn't need this talk of war and fear." Edith looked out the window, ignoring, at least trying to, her parents' spat. But then she had an idea that might end their squabbling, always boring. "Father," she asked, "our trip's first leg, why is it called that?" She made her eyes big. The transfer was made despite the freezing bite of the early April rain. Mother and father set on appeasing their talks as the long Rock Island train rumbled westward, on through the gloaming, like a serpent in the dimming light roaming, a winding path toward Nebraska, a brief stop at Omaha. On the platform, as the dull day was dying, on that 6th day of April, they heard a newsboy calling out a word that changed the world, for he was crying a headline no one could ignore. In banner type, 3 letters, war. 1945. Rolling on toward Denver, the train was wending, past fields of browning corn and wheat. There had been little doubt the war was ending. The Japs would go down to defeat. A weapon that was most stupendous, though Lizzie thought it quite horrendous, had been unleashed upon Japan, a bomb of dreadful power that can destroy whole cities in a glowing tower of fire, heat like the sun, in seconds, centuries undone. A blast and then a death wind blowing, and so began a brand new age. Arthur smiled as he turned the page. The headline shouted Japan's surrender. I knew that we would make 'em pay, Art beamed, but for Liz it didn't end her doubts, lingering. Fears didn't delay. The photo showed people laughing, singing. In New York streets, church bells were ringing. Across the land, both far and near. But for many it meant a new kind of fear. And the news of such power, new dread was growing. Tens of thousands of people killed. Think all of the blood that was spilled. Could this power be checked? No way of knowing whether the world was cursed or blessed, and their train in the sun rolled toward the west. Arthur looked up from his paper, remarking, "Finally, now just you wait and see. Our economy's ready. We'll be embarking to a new era of prosperity." Liz had no comment. She was dreading this new age into which they were heading. But at what cost? The sacrifice of common folk. What a heavy price in human lives. Do those people merit such awful and horrendous death? To be gone in the span of one short breath? I fear this world our girl will inherit. Art replied, they reaped what they had sown. There's surely no reason to bemoan our enemy's fate. Think of our boys dying. If we'd have tried a land assault, we'd have lost 1,000,000 men in trying. No, the enemy was at fault. Edie sensed there was something greater going on, but it didn't make her hate her parents quarreling any less. She understood the world was a mess, but their little war just kept on going. Through the window the hills began to grow, much higher than those she used to know by the Cuyahoga River flowing below their house. She missed that place on the hill and the smile on Mother's face. Arthur was almost 20 years older than Liz, a minor captain of industry who had made his wealth through bold and bolder moves in the market. It helped that he had inherited the factory, insulated copper wire. Thus he was fated as a man who made a commodity needed to keep the country free, to not have to go off to war in danger. Liz was intrigued, a bit in awe, of the handsome man with prospects she saw the love of her life. But now a stranger sat by her side in that Pullman car, a foe to fight in their private war. There had been years of happy marriage. Edie was born and all things seemed right. But 2 years later, with the miscarriage, Liz's world became numbed by sight. Edie was too young to miss the brother she never had. It was the other sadness that Mother had most often shown. It was easy to sense that her parents had grown apart. Outside, a new world to discover. Out west, her mother had said, we'll have fun. But so far she hadn't. The train's steady run made on through the dark. Her old world was over. She'd been impressed by the mountainous heights. Now up ahead, Denver and millions of lights. 1970. Arthur was more concerned with deadlines that sunny day in early May, while Liz was horrified by headlines of what transpired the previous day. She found it sickening, horrific, as the Zephyr rolled on toward the Pacific. Arthur, this time they've gone too far. See how this godforsaken war has gone to killing kids at college? We both have friends who went to Kent. To Liz, this marked a new descent. How could they turn a place of knowledge into a terrible killing field? Back home in Cleveland, church bells pealed. I'll agree they had no reason. The live ammo was a mistake. These protests are tantamount to treason, and something bad was sure to break. And just how long can we let this go on? Their destination, Frisco, was still at least a day ahead. Edie worked on her sketchpad instead of listening to her parents bicker. One more bout of angry word and frown. She was drawing a princess in beautiful gown. The clouds ahead were growing thicker and blacker, impending thunderous rain. America split, was a land in pain. 2 years before, with the Tet Offensive, at home as well, battle lines were drawn, and more became apprehensive of whether war's darkness would see a dawn. Then, years beyond the war's beginning, the question grew, can there be any winning of this conflict so far from home? Stark photos in vivid polychrome, in newspapers now, but history's pages would remember, brought to the living room through TV's window of death and gloom, that made students throw the rocks of ages and the guardsmen throw the lethal lead, leaving 9 kids wounded and 4 kids dead. It's just not right, Arthur, in this nation that innocent citizens too must die. What took place in this awful confrontation shouts that the rule of law is a lie. Come on now, Liz, this is overreaction. That mob represents the radical faction that's growing like cancer in this land. I don't see why you can't understand. Those hippies knew just what they were doing. I'll admit it's too bad that anyone died, but America's patience is being tried. When anyone acts, there will be ensuing reaction. And that's just what happened here. It's this leftist crap that we have to fear. It's like you, Arthur, to show such malice and pretend that it's down to politics. In truth, it's just that you are callous and using your usual verbal tricks. Edie had finished her princess sketching. The California zephyr was stretching its length like a snake across the land. Their quarrel she did not understand. Your actual fears are economic, I know you. Arthur, the money's the thing. Any threat to your precious wealth would bring your favor in all wars, short of atomic. Well, that's a preposterous thing to say. Just then the dark of a tunnel held sway. When they emerged, her parents were quiet. Edith showed her mother the princess sketch. There was no more talk of the college riot. Years later, Edie's art would fetch admirers, and she was widely respected for her paintings, most of which reflected a troubled soul. But few would guess the truths of the past she sought to express. That's very good, dear. What did you name her? What wonderful work, and all done freehand. She looks like a queen in some fairyland. She's Princess Edith, but she never became her. The three settled down for the long night's rest, and the blood-red sun slipped down the west.
5. 2001. In New York City, there is rubble and smoke. Daddy said 2 planes exploded. Buildings fell. The bubble of a quiet morning broke. What remains is worse than a war zone, a scene of terror. Mummy asked if he was in error. My God, it can't be real, she said. Hundreds of people crushed and dead. And Daddy said the numbers rising as searchers find new bodies there. There's something toxic in the air. They're wearing masks, and it's not surprising since so much structure turned to dust. The news almost too grave to trust. What followed was another scuffle between her parents over what the army should do, and their kerfuffle was nothing new to Edie, but she'd had enough and shifted her focus through some mental hocus-pocus to picture the ending of their trip, a railroad atlas in her grip. Their last stop, California, Frisco. On the colored pages on her lap, she traced the northern counties. A map showed Sacramento, San Francisco, then Palo Alto, San Jose. They'd be there by the end of day. Your Uncle Clarence lives in Berkeley, Daddy told her back at home. A den of lefties, he'd said curtly. Puzzled, Edie had thought of a poem she'd read about an all-left-handed village in a country that demanded everyone to write with their right. If she lived there, she thought she might practice drawing with her other hand to flout the unfair law. She shook her head and rubbed her jaw, noting that her father and mother had paused their argument to stare at a giant insect floating there outside the window, before it vanished as quickly as it came. Red gold, it looked to be a moth, a banished butterfly, lost, eons old, and larger than a tabby kitten Edie'd held in a winter mitten at a Christmas pageant years before. It was a gold-winged dinosaur that had no purpose in the present. A wormhole or a time machine had brought it here. What could it mean? Not beautiful, but not unpleasant. Half Luna moth, half sparrowhawk, that Edie wanted to sketch in chalk. Of San Francisco, Edie thought of a silhouette of dizzy hills, cable cars, and quite a lot of tall, thin houses standing still beside the Golden Gate. However, she was fairly sure the city never had been a mecca for mutant bugs or huge anachronistic slugs. The shutterfly they'd seen was native to scorched Nevadan desert plains where Gila monsters waited for rains beneath the prickly pears. Creative as she was, the girl could not have made up such a trick as nature played. The bright chimera gone, the morning's disastrous news came back with force. Mummy asked if there were warnings. What made Edie think divorce? And Daddy sighed. Yes, there'd been chatter, the TV said, but only a scatter of hard intel the FBI and CIA could verify. He'd left for the club car after learning that every plane was on the ground. He'd returned soon after, having found no comfort in the clips of burning buildings, Manhattan, the Pentagon, as their westward trek trailed on and on. 6. 2037. The bullet train to Solstice Station from San Francisco's transit hub was now the fastest in the nation, which the year before had joined the club of countries with no-fly zones border to border, a must to maintain order since satellites shot down 12 jets with secret lasers. Then came the bets on who the culprit was. Some sources said North Korea and Iran, while not one guesser named Japan. Osaka, though, was home to forces of global chaos, a hacker team that vloggers called the Nil Regime. Not since Denver had E's folks spoken more than a few clipped comments, but something had changed, the silence broken by Daddy's sudden move to shut the door to the aisle. When he was seated, he looked to his wife, to E, defeated to a degree he'd never reached before. Prior, he'd come out ready for war, as threatening as a nuke-tipped missile. Yet now, at hundreds of miles an hour, he was sapped of all his firepower. He said no words, but gave a whistle that started high and swiftly dropped, like a rocket falling, until he stopped, then clapped his hands, a flat concussion that jarred E and her mother hard. It seemed to say, end of discussion. No other claim should you regard as true. Our destination's nearing, and all our hopes are disappearing. E's phone perked up. She had a text and wondered what she should do next. Answer it and risk Dad's ravings, or leave it be until their trip had finished at the shuttle strip. She knew they'd given all their savings to take a Mars-bound one-way ride. Her mother sat, electrified as though live wires brushed her body, and E switched off her phone. No friend was texting her to chat. Already she'd sent them her goodbyes. To pretend she'd see them all again was silly. In months, she'd be on hilly, chilly, rust-hued, dust-storm, two-moon Mars, a pioneer among the stars. And they'd be left, her schoolmates, neighbors, spinning on a worsening earth, too poor to leave, too young to birth another world. Despite their labors, with murder drones above the clouds and rancor in the gathering crowds. The triple glass that separated in from out reflected back their small compartment. Aggravated, E could see zilch beyond the track. The hurtling train car held a note of sitting in a locomotive ages ago, 9 lives ago, in an antiquated dress, chapeau, and ankle boots with tight black laces. Then, flashing forward, other E's named Edith, Edie, binaries from different times, divergent places. But unlike a case of déjà vu, E could read their memories, too. When Solstice Station, sprawling, gleaming, hailed to slow the bullet train, E, so wide awake that dreaming fled farther, farther from her brain, began to hum a Grieg sonata her father played at a sailing regatta when she, this she, was very young. She puffed her cheeks, stuck out her tongue, and like a toddler started crying for every Edith she had been. Mother, Liz, forgave her own sin, her abstract love solidifying as she stretched her arms to clutch her child, and elsewhere other Ediths smiled.